I didn't know what panic smelled like until that morning. It was sharp, metallic, like fear mixed with cold sweat and stale coffee. I had just shuffled out of bed, still in my pajamas, when I opened the front door and saw the worst thing a parent could see: an empty porch. No package, no medication, no hope. The refrigerated delivery that was supposed to be there, the one that held my 9-year-old son's life-saving medication, was gone. In its place was a faint damp mark where the box had sat. Then I saw her. 2 doors down, marching across her pristine white porch like she was returning from a royal inspection, was Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. Bathrobe, pink Crocs, and a coffee mug that said, "Boss Babe" in tacky cursive. In one hand, a crumpled plastic envelope, the same size, the same shape. I blinked. My brain stalled. Then something primitive kicked in, and I sprinted barefoot down the front steps. "Karen," I called, my voice already cracking. She turned around slowly like a movie villain who's been caught red-handed. And there it was, that smug little smile she wore when handing out fines or writing up someone's garden gnome. "Unapproved porch clutter," she chirped, as if tossing life-saving medication into the trash was her civic duty. I didn't respond. Not yet. My heart was thundering in my ears as I ran past her house and around the side yard. The smell hit me first: banana peels, coffee grounds, that sour, HOA-approved cleaning product she used obsessively. Then I saw it. In the black trash bin, buried halfway under a pile of garbage, was the thermal packaging, still cold, blue-labeled, and crushed. The words "prescription, refrigerate immediately" were still visible. But the syringe pack inside? Punctured, ruined. That's when I lost it. That's when I shoved the lid open, fished out the box with shaking hands, and turned to see Karen watching me from her back steps, arms crossed like I was the one who had trespassed. "You can't go through my trash," she said calmly. "That's private property." "This was for Caleb," I said, holding up the mangled medication. "My son. He needs this to breathe, Karen." She rolled her eyes. "Then maybe you should pick up your packages faster," she snapped. "Not my fault if it gets thrown out. Section B, line 17, porch clutter is a code violation." I stared at her, speechless. She had seen the label, she had read the warning, she threw it out anyway, and she had the nerve to hide behind a bylaw. That's when something inside me clicked. This wasn't just HOA drama. This wasn't a nosy neighbor who couldn't mind her business. This was dangerous. This was criminal, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I did what I was trained to do. I took a picture of the box, the trash, the timestamp. Then I picked up the ruined medication and walked back to my house, pulse still racing. Caleb's condition was stabilized with our backup meds, but we were running out of time. This dose was critical. One mistake and we'd be back in the ER. And Karen? Karen thought she'd just thrown out another candle order. She had no idea she had just thrown herself headfirst into a legal storm. Because I don't bluff, I prosecute. The moment I closed the front door behind me, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a former federal prosecutor with 10 years of courtroom scars and a filing cabinet of wins against people far scarier than Karen. But none of them had ever come for my son. Caleb was lying on the couch, watching cartoons with the peaceful face of a child who had no idea that his medicine, his literal lifeline, had just been swimming in coffee grounds and banana peels. I set the damaged box on the kitchen counter, took a photo, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the Ring doorbell footage. The camera had caught everything. The delivery driver scanning the package, setting it down neatly at 7:41 a.m. Then, less than 5 seconds later, enter Karen. Bathrobe, Crocs, mug in hand. She stared at the box like it personally offended her. Bent down, picked it up, walked away. No hesitation, no confusion, just clean, practiced theft. She didn't look at the name or the contents like she was unsure. She looked at it like someone who had done this before. Like someone who thought that her personal opinion on neighborhood aesthetics overruled basic human decency. I rewound the footage, again and again. Same result, same twist in my stomach. I called the delivery company. They confirmed it had been signed as delivered, time-stamped, GPS tracked. Legally, it was out of their hands. The pharmacist couldn't issue a replacement without a new prescription. The pediatric specialist was out of town until the next morning. We were on borrowed time. By the time I returned to the porch, the trash bin was gone, pulled back behind Karen's house, out of sight, out of reach, like she was covering her tracks. I rang her doorbell. No answer. I knocked. No answer. And then, because I've met women like Karen before, the ones who use HOA bylaws like swords, I walked straight to the side yard again. Trash bin still there. I flipped it open, took more pictures, pulled the box out, careful not to disturb the packaging too much. That's when she appeared, like a ghost summoned by rage. "You're trespassing," she said in that faux polite tone, arms folded over her chest. "I'm going to have to report this." "You already threw away my son's medication," I replied, voice low, shaking. "Call whoever you want." She blinked, just once, but otherwise didn't flinch. "You shouldn't leave sensitive items on the porch," she said, as if she were reading from a script. "Packages left unattended for more than 10 minutes become community waste under Article C." "There's no Article C," I said. She smirked. "There is now." That's when I knew this wasn't an accident, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Karen had created a world where she could make up laws and enforce them like a dictator with a clipboard. She had no idea what she'd just done. I wasn't just going to file a complaint, I was going to dismantle her. I texted my old friend, Detective Reynolds. We'd worked together on some messy cases back in the day. I asked him one simple question. Does sabotaging life-saving medication count as a felony if done by a civilian pretending to be God? He called me back in 5 minutes. "Yes," he said. "Send me everything." By that evening, Karen was back at it, this time posting on the neighborhood Facebook group. A long, passive-aggressive post about certain residents abusing medical excuses to ignore established neighborhood protocol. She even named me, said I was unstable, dramatic, claimed she was deeply saddened by the hostility. And people were liking it, commenting things like, "She's just doing her job," and "Some people can't handle rules." And what they didn't know, what she didn't know, is that I've spent my entire career tearing down lies. I've questioned CEOs, mobsters, tech bros, and cult leaders on the stand. I've made judges pause mid-sentence. I don't lose to people like Karen. That night, I opened a new legal file on my laptop. I labeled it Karen Endangerment Case. I uploaded the photos, the video, the HOA bylaws, the timestamps, because this wasn't just about a missed package anymore. This was about a woman who weaponized her title to feel powerful, until she picked the wrong porch. And I was just getting started. I thought Karen might panic, maybe retreat, at the very least go silent for a day or two, but no, Karen didn't retreat, she escalated. By the next morning, every front door on our block had a letter taped to it, printed on pastel yellow paper, as if the cheerful color would soften the venom inside. At the top, a message from your HOA president. Underneath, a full-page tirade accusing me of threatening her, falsifying information, and creating unrest in a previously harmonious community. And she wrote that I had used a child's health as a manipulative tool and implied I was mentally unstable due to personal stressors. She never once mentioned the medication, the video, the trash bin, but she made sure to include this gem. We cannot let one resident's personal issues compromise the values we all work hard to uphold. It was signed with her name in loopy cursive and a tiny drawing of a rose, her HOA signature emblem. Karen, even while lying through her teeth, still believed in branding. I stood on my porch holding the letter, watching neighbors peel it off their doors. A few avoided eye contact. One man shook his head and muttered, "She's gone too far." But others? They nodded. They were used to her tone, conditioned to accept her logic. I wasn't. I scanned the letter, took photos, and added them to the file. This single act, the public defamation, had just moved her from negligence into malice. She wasn't just careless anymore. She was calculated. That changed everything. The next morning, I walked into the police station and filed a formal report for criminal negligence and endangerment. I handed over the ring footage, the photos of the destroyed medication, the Facebook post, and the HOA letter. The officer at the desk took one look at the photos and raised an eyebrow. "I've seen some HOA drama," he said, "but this might be a first." I nodded. "It won't be the last." "Yeah, it's same case. Stay." Then I called the district attorney's office. I asked for a consultation to open a civil case with the intent to pursue criminal charges. I wasn't bluffing. I knew how the process worked because I'd walked that exact path, except on the other side of the bench. Now I had a personal reason. Later that week, I submitted a request to the HOA board for an emergency disciplinary hearing against Karen. I attached every piece of evidence, time-stamped, highlighted, annotated. Color-coded because if you're going to burn someone down, you do it with precision. The board responded with silence. No email, no phone call, nothing. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't stay quiet. She liked an audience. And sure enough, 3 days later, the emergency meeting notice appeared in everyone's mailbox. The wording was bureaucratic and hollow. Discussion regarding ongoing resident disputes. Attendance strongly encouraged. But I knew what it meant. Karen wanted a show. She wanted to spin the narrative before I could present the truth. She still thought this was her arena. That afternoon, the HOA conference room was packed. Karen swept in 10 minutes late, wearing a bright pink power suit and sunglasses big enough to double as riot shields. She was flanked by 2 loyal board members, both men who hadn't read a single bylaw in years, but always voted with her. She took her seat at the head of the table like she was hosting a press conference for a product launch. Then she turned to me and smiled like we were old friends. "Glad you could join us," she said sweetly, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Just in time for the disciplinary discussion." I didn't sit. "You're being investigated for endangering a child's life," I said, calm and cold. "You should be finding a lawyer, not hosting meetings." She waved a hand, dismissive. "The medication wasn't labeled properly. It was on your porch for over 15 minutes. That's a violation." I dropped a printed copy of the HOA's own bylaws onto the table. "There is no clause regarding emergency medical deliveries," I replied. "And even if there were, HOA codes do not override federal law. You tampered with a prescription." Her smile cracked, just a sliver. Her lips twitched before pulling themselves back into place. "You can't speak to me like that," she said. "This is an internal HOA meeting. This is a prelude to a courtroom," I shot back. "And you're on record, so speak carefully." One of the board members cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly regretting every life decision that led him to this meeting. Karen turned to him, waiting for backup. He pretended to examine his notes like they were written in ancient Greek. I laid it all out, calm, measured, in order: the footage, the timestamp, the urgency of the medication, the absence of any legitimate reason for her to touch the package, let alone destroy it. They tried to look neutral. Most failed. One woman on the board couldn't even meet my eyes. Karen, meanwhile, launched into her trademark monologue about neighborhood standards, property values, and her unwavering commitment to order. She accused me, again, of manipulating the situation to score sympathy. She held up a stack of screenshots from Facebook comments, quoting them like they were gospel. But just as she was gaining momentum, the door opened. Mr. Delaney walked in, the oldest member of the board, a retired engineer with a face like carved oak and a voice like gravel. He barely spoke at meetings, never took sides. But when he did show up, people listened. He walked straight to me, didn't say a word, and handed me a USB drive. Then he sat in the back row and folded his hands. Karen's voice faltered. Her eyes flicked to the flash drive. For the first time since this began, she looked unsettled. I didn't know what was on that USB yet, but I knew this. Whatever was coming next, Karen wasn't ready for it, and this time the whole room was watching. I didn't open the USB drive that night, not right away. I waited until Caleb was asleep, curled up under his spaceship blanket, breathing easy for the first time in days. I needed that moment of stillness. Just him and me and the soft whir of his bedside humidifier. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're safe." Then I walked into the kitchen, plugged the drive into my laptop, and waited. Folders, dates, video files, a treasure trove of HOA surveillance footage. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. Just clips from various angles of our street, but then I found it. The moment. Karen. Walking out of her house, robe tied tight, Crocs squeaking slightly, coffee mug in hand. She spots the package on my porch, pauses, bends down, reads the label. She glances around. No one in sight. Then she does something that makes my stomach twist. She pulls out her phone, and she takes a photo of the label, of the package. She zooms in. Then she walks over to her trash bin, lifts the lid with one hand, and drops it in with the other like she's taking out last night's leftovers. She doesn't hesitate, doesn't flinch. And then she goes back inside, like it was just another Tuesday. I watched that clip 5 times. Each time my jaw clenched tighter. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't confusion. It was premeditated, intentional, documented. She didn't just toss out my son's medication, she made sure she had evidence of it. For what? To brag? To protect herself if someone asked questions? To use against me later? I forwarded everything to Detective Reynolds. 10 minutes later, he called. "She took a photo?" he asked, incredulous. "Clear as day," I said. "She's done." The next morning, the police delivered a notice to Karen's door. Not an arrest yet, but a formal notice of investigation. She was being officially investigated for child endangerment and destruction of medical property. I heard the news before the ink had dried on the paper. Karen responded the only way Karen knew how, with more chaos. By noon, she had posted a new community letter on every door, this time printed in bold red font, as if the color might scare us into compliance. She accused me of forging evidence, manipulating police, and launching a smear campaign against a female leader in a male-dominated society. She also claimed that my son's condition was potentially exaggerated for sympathy. I stood there on my porch, holding the paper, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I laughed out loud. It was such a desperate swing, so wildly off base, but it was also the final nail. Because now I had proof of malice. This wasn't about HOA rules. This wasn't about community standards. This was about a woman obsessed with control who would do anything to keep her illusion of power intact. I added the letter to the case file, but I wasn't working alone anymore. That week, I started knocking on doors. Quietly, politely, just a conversation. It started with Mr. Delaney. "She's been doing it for years," he told me, pouring a single cup of black coffee. "Tossing packages, fining veterans, making people feel like intruders in their own homes." He handed me a manila folder, old meeting minutes, memos, internal emails. Karen had reshaped the HOA board into her own little regime. Over the last 3 years, 3 members had mysteriously resigned. She replaced them with friends who never questioned her. Buried in the papers was something even more damning, a formal complaint. Filed 2 years ago by a woman named Teresa Maddox, whose husband was a disabled veteran. Their wheelchair ramp had been removed overnight. No warning, no notice. The complaint included photos, permits, and even a doctor's note explaining its necessity. Karen had cited aesthetic inconsistency and property value concerns. The couple moved 2 months later. I added it all to the growing file. Sworn statements, timeline logs, financial records. The dots were connecting fast, and every arrow pointed to Karen. This wasn't about a package anymore. It was a pattern, a system, a neighborhood dictatorship hiding behind decorative shrubs and fine print. And now that pattern had a witness list. By Friday, I had 6 sworn statements from other residents, 2 previous city complaints, and at least a dozen instances of selective enforcement, threats, and what looked like, at best, financial mismanagement. At worst, fraud. Karen didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just facing a civil case. She was standing at the edge of criminal prosecution, and the only thing more dangerous than a tyrant with power is a tyrant who realizes she's losing it. The first sign that Karen was unraveling didn't come in the form of an outburst. It came as a bright orange sticker, slapped onto my mailbox like a scarlet letter. Violation, non-standard paint finish. My mailbox, which hadn't been repainted, retouched, or even touched since I moved in 5 years ago. I peeled it off slowly, fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the kind of rage that simmers so hot it turns cold. She was retaliating, and she wasn't even trying to be subtle. That same afternoon, I got a text from a neighbor. "Karen's going door to door with a clipboard. She's asking if you've ever made threats. Says you forged the video." So that was her strategy now, character assassination. She couldn't dispute the facts, the footage, the timestamps, the medication, so she went after me. Personally, desperately, like a wounded animal baring its teeth just to look dangerous. But what she didn't know was that her house of cards was about to collapse from the inside, because I hadn't forgotten about Mr. Delaney. There was something about the way he handed me that USB drive, silent, deliberate, like a man unburdening himself, that told me he had more to say. So I paid him another visit. His home was tucked behind a curtain of ivy and shade trees, the kind of house that smelled like books and old wood. He poured 1 mug of coffee just like before and sat across from me. "She's been doing it for years," he said, no hesitation this time. "People moved away. Some just gave up. Others tried to fight. But she always won, because she knew no one wanted to make it public." He slid a drawer open and pulled out a worn folder. Inside, meeting notes, edited agendas, unapproved amendments. A history of how Karen had twisted the HOA into a private fiefdom. She'd overridden votes, altered minutes, silenced dissent by citing fabricated clauses that never existed in the bylaws. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized she hadn't just broken the rules, she'd rewritten them. And then there was the complaint from Teresa Maddox. I remembered her husband in a wheelchair, their home by the walking trail. Karen had ordered their ramp removed under the guise of community aesthetic standards. The city had never approved the action, the ramp had permits. The complaint included photos, before and after, even a doctor's letter, all ignored. It was never about aesthetics, it was about power. I scanned every document with Delaney's blessing and handed them to Detective Reynolds. His response was short, clipped, professional. This just turned into a criminal case. Meanwhile, Karen was still playing queen. She hosted a community trust seminar at the clubhouse, complete with catered sandwiches and a projector slideshow titled Restoring Civility in Trying Times. I showed up, sat in the back, watched her perform like nothing was happening. She quoted Gandhi, she smiled at babies, she thanked the board for their unshakable loyalty during unjustified attacks. Then she opened the floor for questions. I stood up. Karen, how does throwing away a child's prescription medication contribute to social cohesion? Gasps echoed across the room. Karen froze. I didn't know it was medication, she said sharply, for the fourth time that week. Security footage says otherwise. Your own HOA camera shows you reading the label, photographing it, and throwing it away. Silence. I turned to the crowd. Did you know she removed a veteran's wheelchair ramp? Or called animal control on a blind man's service dog? Voices murmured. Heads turned, eyes widened. Then someone in the back, someone I didn't even know, said it out loud. She doesn't speak for us. And that was it. The spell broke. The slideshow froze mid-frame. Someone laughed nervously. Another person stood up and left. Then another and another. Karen's empire, built on fear, fines, and formality, was crumbling right there in that stuffy HOA room, one disgusted stare at a time. The next day, I officially filed my civil suit. The charges: destruction of medical property, reckless endangerment of a minor, defamation, abuse of authority, willful negligence. But that wasn't the worst part for Karen. The worst part was what the criminal investigation uncovered next: the money. Thousands of dollars in HOA funds paid out to a landscaping company, on jobs that never happened, contractors who didn't exist, reimbursements with no receipts. Detective Reynolds called it what it was: fraud. Karen had set up a shell company under her cousin's name and had been billing the HOA for years. She wasn't just power-hungry, she was profiting off of it. The district attorney had enough to prepare formal charges. And still, Karen smiled at the next board meeting. She handed out cookies, wore a pastel sweater set, acted like everything was just fine, but I saw it in her eyes, that twitch, that flicker, that quiet rising fear. Because she knew the storm was here. And for the first time, she wasn't holding the umbrella, she was the target. Courtrooms have their own kind of silence. It's not calm. It's the kind of silence that feels like the whole room is holding its breath, waiting to see who gets crushed and who walks away clean. When I stepped up to the plaintiff's table that morning, I wasn't nervous. I was sharpened. Every moment since Karen had tossed my son's medication into the trash, every photo, every file, every sleepless night had led here. The judge, a weathered man with a face like granite and the patience of a saint, flipped through the initial documents with the deadpan boredom of someone who had seen every flavor of HOA drama. Lawn disputes, fence height squabbles, mailbox arguments. But then he hit the part labeled endangerment of a child. His brow furrowed. He stopped flipping. He read deeper, and then he looked up at Karen. Looked up. She had traded in her pastel blazers for a muted navy pantsuit. No flashy jewelry, no clipboard, no lemon water. She sat stiffly beside her attorney, who looked like the kind of guy you hire when you're not expecting to lose, but you're worried you might. I gave my opening statement, and it was short. This case isn't about a violation. It's about a violation of humanity. It's about a woman who believed her authority gave her the right to endanger a child and get away with it. Then I began to lay it out, methodical, factual, clean. The Ring doorbell footage, the timestamp, the security camera video from the HOA's own system, the photo of the destroyed medication in the trash bin, the label clearly marked refrigerate immediately prescription, and finally, Karen's Facebook post and the HOA-wide letter accusing me of being unstable. The evidence didn't speak, it shouted. Karen's lawyer tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding. He claimed she didn't know it was medication, that she didn't read the label, that she thought it was abandoned packaging. He even said I was leveraging my legal background for a personal vendetta. But every time he said something, the projector screen showed a frame from the footage. Karen reading the label. Karen taking a photo. Karen tossing it into the trash. His words bounced off a wall of proof. Then came the witnesses. First up, Mrs. Maddox, the woman whose wheelchair ramp had been removed. She walked slowly to the stand, frail but fierce. Her voice shook slightly, but her words cut deep. She told me my husband's recovery equipment didn't fit the visual theme of the neighborhood. Then she fined us until we left. We felt like intruders in our own home. Next, Hal, the Iraq War veteran. He described being fined repeatedly for flying the American flag from a pole that wasn't HOA approved. He choked up as he said, "I served for that flag, and they made me feel like a criminal for it." Then came Leah, a high school student who got a noise violation for practicing violin. She said my music was aggressive, Leah said, blinking back tears. It was Beethoven. Each testimony added another weight to the scale, and it was tipping hard. But the turning point? That came when I called Karen's daughter to the stand. She was in her 20s, calm, composed, and reluctant. She didn't want to be there. You could see it in her eyes. But when she was sworn in and looked across the courtroom at her mother, something shifted. She spoke clearly. My mom always said power doesn't mean anything if people don't see it. She needed to be seen, respected, feared. There was a pause, a breath. She once made me rehome our dog because it shed too much and didn't match the couch. And then, she knew what was in that package. I watched her take the picture. I asked her why she didn't just leave it alone. She said people like that need to be reminded who's in charge. Gasps, audible ones. Karen's expression didn't crack, at least not fully, but her hands clenched, her jaw twitched. When it was Karen's turn to testify, she tried to flip the script. She played soft, wounded. She spoke in gentle tones, voice trembling just enough to look authentic to someone who didn't know her. She described herself as a protector of order in a chaotic world and claimed everything was a misunderstanding. I never saw the label, she said, even though she took a photo of it. I didn't mean to throw away anything important, even though she posted about it online afterward. I care deeply about this community, even though she nearly cost a child his life. When I stood to cross-examine her, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Did you take a photo of the package before throwing it away? I asked. She paused. I don't remember. I clicked the next slide. There she was, phone in hand, camera pointed. Did you submit a violation report that listed the package's tracking number? Silence. You also wrote, some residents need to stop using medical drama as an excuse, didn't you? I was referring to general behavior. Your behavior, I said. Your need to control. Your belief that your clipboard makes you queen. She didn't answer. The jury didn't need her to. Closing arguments came and went, but the decision was already written on the faces of the jurors. It took them less than 3 hours. They found her liable on all counts. Negligence, destruction of medical property, emotional distress, defamation. The judge ordered punitive damages. Karen was permanently removed from her HOA position, but that wasn't all. As we were preparing to leave the courtroom, a court officer walked over to Karen and handed her a new envelope. A criminal indictment. The fraud investigation was complete. Karen had billed the HOA for landscaping contracts through a shell company she created under her cousin's name. Maintenance invoices for work that never happened. Reimbursements that didn't exist. She wasn't just cruel, she was corrupt. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, I caught a final glimpse of her face. It wasn't rage, it wasn't regret, it was disbelief, like someone who built an empire out of fear and fake rules, only to watch it collapse under the weight of truth. Outside, reporters swarmed. I gave a short statement. Nothing flashy, no gloating, just the truth. Because this wasn't just justice for me, it was justice for every neighbor she tried to silence, and I wasn't done yet. You'd think the end of a courtroom battle like that would come with fireworks, or at least a moment where someone stands and claps, Hollywood style. But the real ending was quieter, more personal, more human. It came a week later, when I walked past the community clubhouse and noticed something strange. The HOA bulletin board, the one Karen had filled for years with rules, memos, and passive-aggressive newsletters, was empty, completely blank, no threats about trash cans. No clip art warnings about porch plants, just cork and pushpins. So I added something. I pinned a copy of the jury verdict, just the verdict, no commentary, no speech, just the truth, printed in bold, undeniable ink. and I walked away. That week, something shifted. The air felt lighter, the neighborhood breathed. For the first time in years, people smiled without looking over their shoulders. Lawn decorations started to appear, little flamingos, welcome mats, garden gnomes. Someone tied balloons to their mailbox. Another neighbor hung a flag that had been collecting dust in his garage. It wasn't rebellion, it was relief. Caleb bounced back fast. Kids are made of something magic like that. He didn't understand the legal nuances, but he understood this. The woman who scared people wasn't in charge anymore. He felt safe. So did I. Then came the emergency HOA election. Karen's removal left a vacuum. The board, now deeply humbled and slightly terrified, called for a community vote. They asked if I would run. I laughed, loud and honest. No, I said. I've had enough courtrooms for a lifetime. But I did agree to help rewrite the bylaws, the ones Karen had twisted into weapons. We stripped out every fabricated clause, every line that gave unchecked power to a clipboard and a smug smile. We made the rules readable, fair, and most importantly, humane, and people showed up. People who had never spoken at meetings before raised their hands. They brought snacks. They volunteered for committees. For the first time, the HOA felt like neighbors, not a regime. And then, of course, came the twist. A month after the verdict, I received a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just a single typed note on crisp white paper. You may have won your little battle, but people like me don't go away. We adapt. See you soon. No signature. But I didn't need one. The drama, the poison-laced threat dressed as confidence, it reeked of Karen. Even in exile, she couldn't let go, couldn't bear the silence. I handed it over to Detective Reynolds. He logged it, added it to the file. Threatening someone while under criminal investigation, he said, shaking his head. That's bold and stupid. A few weeks later, fate delivered its own poetic justice. I was driving Caleb to his soccer game when we passed a county roadside cleanup crew, in orange vests, grabbing trash along the highway. And there she was, Karen. No clipboard, no power suit. Just a high-visibility vest and a trash grabber. Her once blonde hair pulled into a tight, joyless bun. Her back hunched, posture wilted. She was assigned to cleanup duty as part of her community service sentence. She looked up just as our car passed. Our eyes met. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. I just gave her the same nod she used to give while inspecting someone's bushes for leaf overgrowth. And I drove on. Caleb, sipping a juice box in the back seat, asked who she was. She used to be the HOA president, I said. Now she's just doing some cleaning. He shrugged. Oh, okay. And that, more than any verdict, felt like the real ending. Karen wasn't scary anymore. She was just a woman in a vest picking up candy wrappers on the side of the road. The final nail came when the results of the HOA financial audit were released publicly. Pages upon pages of suspicious reimbursements, fake contractor payments, and personal expenses filed as maintenance. No one defended her, not even her old allies. In every meeting after that, if someone proposed a policy that sounded a little too controlling, someone would inevitably raise an eyebrow and say, "That sounds a little Karen." And that was enough to shut it down. Months passed. Maria, a school librarian with a warm laugh and no ego, was elected the new HOA president. Her first act? Hosting a block party. No surveys, no fines, just food, folding chairs, and laughter echoing through the street. Someone brought a karaoke machine. Caleb helped run the water balloon booth. I stood by the grill with a soda in hand, watching neighbors talk like people, not like suspects. For the first time since we'd moved in, I felt settled. Not like I was surviving between letters and memos, but like this place might actually be home. People came up and thanked me. They told me their stories. We laughed about violations for bird feeders, Halloween skeletons that were too expressive, and skateboards being labeled auditory hazards. Karen had ruled with fear. Now, she was just a cautionary tale. And that night, as I tucked Caleb into bed and kissed his forehead, I glanced at the shelf where his medication sat. Safe, unopened, undisturbed. Exactly where it should be. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need revenge. I just needed peace. And in the end, I got it. Not because Karen gave it to me, but because I took it back. One courtroom, one neighbor, one truth at a time.